Today we continue our Unmasked series with lust. The week that I was scheduled to preach, we are preaching about lust. So, fun times. But this can be an uncomfortable topic because it usually involves lust of a sexual or physical nature, but it isn't always about that. Some people lust after things too. They lust after something that they don't have, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Lust is one of those sins that feels like it can be kept a secret, that you can do it in hiding and no one else will know about it. But almost always, it eventually leads to other sins in an attempt to mask and cover up our bad behavior. Let me tell you a story. There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. And when I'm talking to kids, I would say a ewe lamb is a female lamb. He raised it, so he raised it as a baby. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him, or for us, like a beloved pet. Now, a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. So in other words, took the poor man's lamb and they had it for dinner. So what do you think about this story? Was the rich man wrong? If so, do you think he took responsibility for the wrong he had perpetrated against the poor man? What do you think the rich man should have to do to make amends for the wrong he's done? If you'd like to share your thoughts on any of these questions, please do so in the Facebook comments. But would you believe that this story has its beginnings in a man's lust for a married woman? We'll get back to this story a little later. We're talking about David and Bathsheba. So we find this account in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. I'm not going to read all of it to you, but I will read a few passages throughout our discussion. We're obviously going to look at where David went wrong in this whole story. Most of you may know it, some of you may not. So we're just going to run through the story and see where things went wrong. 2 Samuel 11:1. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Okay. It was springtime and kings were supposed to be fighting with their armies. But David was not where he was supposed to be. He was at the wrong place at the wrong time, and he got himself in trouble. So, first question. Have you ever gotten yourself in trouble because you were not where you were supposed to be? Or you were in the wrong place at the wrong time? If so, type yes in the comments. If you want to expound, you can do that, but you don't have to. For myself, as a teenager, I remember a few times, just once or twice, getting in trouble because I wasn't home when I was supposed to be at curfew time. I think most people have been there at least once in their lives. Teenagers tend to stay out past curfew. Verse 2. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Then she went back home. So David is already king, right? So he has a palace. He has riches, I'm sure. He has more than one wife and many children. What more did this guy need? He could have found another wife that was not already married, and Bathsheba was married to one of his soldiers. So he saw someone or something that he didn't have and he wanted it. And a little funny side note on this Bible story, we were teaching it in Sunday school with like 5th and 6th graders and teenagers a few years ago. And we were reading from the Bible this account, and one of the kids said, David's a stalker, because he was standing on the roof looking at Bathsheba. And so yes, he was a stalker, right? So he got himself in trouble because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then he saw something that he didn't have, and he wanted that person that he didn't have. So David forgot that he was a man after God's own heart. He was a young man who was anointed king over Israel, over everyone in Israel, including his older brothers. He had killed a lion, he had killed a bear, and he killed the giant Philistine Goliath. God had brought him through all his challenges and made him king, and yet he forgot. David decided that David needed something God had not given him, so David would take care of it himself. Have you ever tried to take a situation into your own hands, especially after you've asked God, would you lead me? Would you help me? Would you give me an answer? And then you decide, I'm going to take things into my own hands. This is what David did. And then he tried to cover up his sin. He committed adultery with Bathsheba, as we read, and then verse 5, the woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. Well, now he's in real trouble. In verses 6 through 13, we see David tried to cover his sin by calling her husband Uriah back from war to spend time with his wife. When Uriah refused, David got him drunk, hoping he would go home to his wife. But Uriah's character was stronger than David's at this time because his thoughts were of loyalty to his king and his fellow soldiers. So he did not stay with Bathsheba, and David's alibi was crumbling around him. Now, do you remember a time that you tried to cover up something that you had done wrong? I think we've all done something like that. It's like when a child eats a cookie before dinner and is caught with like crumbs on them or something, and you say, were you in the cookies? Were you in the candy before dinner? And they say, no, like the dog got into it and I was just trying to take it away from him and that's how crumbs got on me. Covering up sin usually involves more sin. You tell a lie, then you tell another lie, and then you lie to cover up the first lie and the second lie and third lie, and then you forget who you told what lie to. And covering up sin just usually involves more sin. And then David gets others involved in his sin. David sends Uriah back to war and instructs his commanders to put him in front of the fighting, then to retreat from him. So let's recap how David gets others involved, or his whole situation. He wasn't where he was supposed to be. He saw Bathsheba bathing, right? He was stalking her. He had lust for Bathsheba. Now he gets other people involved. He sent a servant to find out who she was. Then he committed adultery. He tried to get Uriah drunk so he would go to Bathsheba. He asked his commanders to put Uriah in the front of the fight, got them involved, and ultimately used his army and the opposing army to murder Uriah. So it wasn't just enough that David had lust or had a desire for something. He also included other people in the cover-up. So do you remember a time when you tried to get someone else involved in your deceit? You tried to get someone else to help you cover for you? If so, you can say yes in the comments. Maybe as a kid you used those words, don't tell mom. You know, like in the Brady Bunch, when they're playing ball in the house and they broke was it the vase or the horse? Whatever it was they broke. I think it was a vase. And they decided to glue it all together and let's not tell mom. They got everybody involved in the lie. And if you're a parent or a teacher or you work with kids in any way, you've seen how they try to convince others to cover up for their misdeeds. I think we've all been there once or twice. So then David convinces himself that he had no part in Uriah's death. It seems that David doesn't want to admit he's done wrong. So when David's given the news of Uriah's death, this is his response. In 2 Samuel 11:25, David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab." So now that Uriah is dead, David can marry Bathsheba and make his child legitimate, but it doesn't make his sin legitimate. The problem with lying, again, is that you must remember which lie you've told to whom, and the problem with hiding your sin and covering it up is that it changes how you act and who you are. Do you see that David still has not admitted or repented of his sins? First of his lust. Maybe the first thing was he wasn't where he was supposed to be. Then his lust. Then adultery, lying, plotting murder. Through his sin, David has broken his connection with God, not the other way around. God never walked away from David, but David broke that connection with God. But God doesn't allow his people to cover up their sin. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, God sends Nathan to talk with David. Nathan tells him the story of the rich man, the poor man, and the lamb that I read to you earlier. David becomes outraged, but doesn't realize that the story is about him. Have you ever been upset by someone else's bad behavior just to realize you've done the same thing? If so, type yes in the comments. I think most of us have done this as well. You know that saying that says, when you're pointing your finger at someone else, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you? Or the parable that Jesus told in Matthew 7 about noticing the speck of sawdust in another person's eye while you pay no attention to the plank in your own. It's the human condition. So 2 Samuel 12:5. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are that man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you have despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." And God also told David that his sons would always fight each other, right? That part that says the sword will never depart from your house. And there are some terrible stories of the animosity between David's children later in 2 Samuel. Keep reading into 2 Samuel and you'll see how all this unfolds. So there are consequences to our sin. But there's also grace. When Nathan explains that David has done the same as the rich man in the story, David finally admits he's done wrong, and he repents. And God forgives David when he repents. God still loves David, but there are always consequences to our sin. So in 2 Samuel 11 and 12, Nathan tells David that there will be a calamity on his household. His wives will be taken by someone close to him and out in the open. Verse 12. You did it in secret, what he did, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. In broad daylight. So the whole thing with David is he was trying to hide this first sin, and now he's repented and God forgives him. But the consequence is it's going to happen to him, and it's going to happen in front of everyone. Then God tells David that the child Bathsheba was carrying would die. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die, but because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die. So David has broken his relationship with God, but God is the one who sends Nathan in an attempt to repair the relationship. Does that sound familiar to you? Romans 12:8. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. In the middle of our sin, God reaches out to us to provide a way to repair the relationship. Aren't you glad that God makes the first move toward us? Can you think of a time that you had sinned or done something wrong and God sent someone to lovingly confront you? That was from God. Some people confront you in a manner that's not loving, and it probably isn't from God, because you see the way God sent Nathan to talk to David. But he is always the one that reaches out to repair the relationship. So, let's talk about lust. In 1 John 2:16, John says, "For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, come not from the Father, but from the world." Right? So lust is about wanting something we don't have and really focusing on that, and that's all we can think about. And that's the world that tells us, you should have this and you should have that, and why don't you have it, and why didn't God give it to you? I like the Passion Translation. So this is verses 15 through 17. 1 John 2:15 through 17. "Don't set the affections of your heart on this world or in loving the things of this world. The love of the Father and the love of the world are incompatible. For all the world can offer us, the gratification of our flesh, the allurement of the things of the world, and the obsession with status and importance, none of these things come from the Father, but from the world. This world and its desires are in the process of passing away, but those who love to do the will of God live forever." So John writes these words while he's teaching God's followers not to love this world to the point that we lose or forget our love for God. Because it's true, all the things in this world that we want and want and want, and it's okay to have things, but all these things will disappear one day. We'll just be in heaven with the Lord. These things won't matter. But doing the will of God matters. So lust is not only a sin of a sexual nature, although that's what most people think of first, and it's most definitely the issue in 2 Samuel 11 and 12. But you might be thinking, I don't have an issue with lust. I don't have anything to learn from this sermon. But lust starts by simply wanting something that you don't have. Can you remember a time that you wanted something that you didn't have? If so, share yes in the comments. And if you want to share more, you can, but you don't have to. As a kid, I remember wanting a room of my own. I shared a room with my sister. My brother got his own room, and I really wanted my own room. And I just remember for years going like, I just want my own room. And I didn't realize that I was actually blessed to have a room and a house to live in. I was just focused on what I didn't have and not on the blessings that I did have. And eventually, my brother moved out, so then I had my own room. So things work out. But I have asked Mike to share a story from his childhood about wanting something so bad that he made bad choices to get it. I wouldn't call it exactly lust, but this is where lust begins, wanting something so badly that we would do anything to get it. So listen to Mike's story. This week we're talking about lust, but also about how lust actually starts when you want something that you don't have. You do things that you wouldn't normally do to get them. And so you have a story about your baseball cards.
Yeah.
And how that became a problem for you.
When I was a kid, I used to collect baseball cards because my uncle started me off. I think I was 7 years old. He gave me about 500 to 1,000 baseball cards that I started with. I built it up from there to eventually like a little over 15,000 baseball cards by 1976 when I was 14 years old.
Fast forward.
Yes.
To when this became a problem. Well, you collected many, many cards. How did you do that?
Well.
Or how many did you have were you, like the most you had at one time?
15,000, a little over 15,000 was the end total that I had before they got
Okay, so how did you get so many baseball cards? How were you able to buy so many baseball cards?
I will use my allowance, and then when I became a paper boy, yes, newspapers, nobody knows what those are, you millennials don't know. But anyway, used to deliver them door to door, then you collect money on Friday, what they owed the paper, you got a little cut of it, and that was your money. Well, at the end of the route was the grocery store called Blanton's, but of no relation. And I would go in there and I'd buy baseball cards pretty much every day. And
with only your portion of the money?
no. Turns out I was spending the money I owed the newspaper to get baseball cards, but I got a lot of them that year. And it turned out I was like $40, $50 in debt to the paper. My mom was not too happy about that because she had to fork over the $40 or $50 to the newspaper.
So what were the consequences of this problem of yours?
Heartbreak and despair. I had a Foot Locker full of baseball cards.
And they were good ones, right?
They were good. Except for the one year I used them as wallpaper. The backs were kind of torn off, so those were very good. But anyway, my mom made me get rid of the baseball cards. She made me give them back to my uncle, who had a son at this time. So the deal was supposed to be, I get a son, his son gives them to mine. That didn't work out, but anyway.
So you never saw your baseball cards again?
Well, I used to. I would go, when I went to their house, I would go upstairs and look in the Foot Locker to look at my baseball cards. Until one fateful day, I went up to look in the Foot Locker and it was gone. All of them. I think I threw a fit and they told me that they got in financial trouble and they had to sell the baseball cards to get out of their financial trouble. So
then you never saw your cards again?
No, never saw them again. It still hurts.
So, I mean, it probably wasn't lust that you had for the baseball cards, but you wanted something you didn't have and couldn't afford, and you did it.
I was trying to get the whole set of baseball cards from 1976, I think it was. And I did, but it came at a severe price that still hurts to this day.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you, Mike, for sharing. I believe we've all wanted something we didn't have. But when we dwell on that thing or that thought for a long time, it can change to lust. Lust is a problem in our heart before it becomes a problem of actions. One of the lies we believe is that I need or I should have everything someone else has. Just like the verse in 1 John, when we want the things of the world because the world tells us, we lose sight. Lust is a never-ending hamster wheel, right? Of never having enough. I want this and I want that, I got that, I need this, and it's just a hamster wheel of never having enough. Most people don't choose to live this way, but lust can very quickly get out of hand and take control over your life, just as it did for King David. So with him it was a sexual lust and sexual sin, and then lying and murder and those kind of things. For us today, it might be, I need this, I want that, and maybe we get into a lot of debt because we just bought too many things. And then we're under the pressure of paying the debt back, and it's just never ending. We can trust God to provide. As with most sin against others, lust is about not trusting that God will supply all that you need, or we don't understand that if we don't have it, then it's not good for us. Philippians 4:19, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. 2 Corinthians 9:8, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. So when you forget that God loves you and gives you all good things and supplies all your needs through Christ, you become disconnected from God's love, right? It's the same we are disconnecting that relationship. Just as King David did, you forget who you are and what God has done for you. Remember when Nathan is telling David what God said in 2 Samuel 12:8. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah, and if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. When we focus on what we don't have, we begin to lust for and covet what others have. We forget that we are precious, beautiful, perfect, holy children of God. We are made in the image of Yahweh, the great I am, the Creator who knows your name and what you need and when you need it. So what do we do about lust? What do we do if we're overcome with lust? Is all hope gone? Is God done with you? Well, not quite. As in David's situation, God will reach out to remind you of who you are and who He is. So are you listening to God? David's way out of sin was to admit and repent. When God reaches out to remind you of who you are, will you admit you're wrong and repent and turn the other way? Will you allow God to free you from your prison of shame and regret? As with most things in life, we have a choice. Would you rather live in a world where your life is controlled by lust, where you feel like there's never enough and you have to hurt people to get it? Or would you rather live free, knowing that God can and will supply all your needs because He loves you? And if you don't have something you want right now, it's because you don't need it right now? If you remember that all good things come from God, that He will supply all your needs, and focus on gratitude for the blessings you already have, you'll not be able to focus on what you don't have. And just as He told David, God can give you more. I have a friend who has a plaque that reads, when you love what you have everything you need. And in a biblical sense, when you focus on God's blessings, you will see yourself lacking in nothing.
Darkness tries to roll over my bones. Sorrow comes to steal the joy I own. wouldn't stand a chance when I stand in